represented by Mr. Darden and Mr. Clarke. Mr. Neufeld, is there something you need to take up?
Just to put you on notice, Your Honor, about 30 seconds ago, Mr. Clarke furnished me with a 12-page single-space document describing how they calculated the numbers for the mixed stains, which was apparently created yesterday. All I'm asking for is we can either do it now, it'll take me about 20 minutes, or we can do a recess mid-morning for about 20 minutes. I'm going to need to examine this to the extent I have any objections about what they did here as a foundation matter. I want to put them on the record, but I'm going to have to review this document, and I obviously can't do it in the next 30 seconds.
Mr. Clarke, when do you anticipate getting to the mixed stain calculations?
After the break,
All right.
if there's a mid-morning break.
So all I'm asking you is give me a few extra minutes of that mid-morning break.
Sure, sounds reasonable. All right, let's have the jurors, please.
There's two brief items I'd like to bring up. The first is it's my request to use immediately the large light box.
Immediately.
First thing with some
Okay.
fairly brief testimony, and then ask that the jurors be allowed to walk by the light box. And I'm going to ask that be done in two segments because there are 3 sets of results and we can only put 2 up at once. It's going to be my request to show the Rockingham foyer, the boot drop, as well as the Bundy stain, that set of 6 auto rads across one row, and have the witness also use the single cocktail auto rad with the shoe print 56. Have the jurors walk by, and then do the same thing with actually almost no questioning at all with regard to the 6 auto rads that relate to the stop.
All right. Any comment, Mr. Neufeld?
Clarification, you want them to do 3 walkthroughs because there are 3 different sets of order ads?
2 walkthroughs.
Because there are 2 different sets of order ads.
3 different sets of auto rads.
Okay, but you can't get them all on at once, that's all you're saying?
Correct.
Okay, that's not okay.
There's one other item, but I believe it can wait till the next break, and it relates to what the court had asked me to bring up before asking the witness questions about the stop.
Okay.
I have no objection to the walkthrough.
All right, let's get the monster in. I can't think of any other way to do it.
Just from a logistics standpoint, where will we be standing if the jurors walk past? What do you suggest? Logistically, where will the court want us to stand? The jurors are going to walk back in front of us. And may we have a showing at some point, Mr. Simpson?
Absolutely. In fact, are you going to put this up right now? How do you propose to put them up on the monster?
It was my plan to place, I don't know if the court can see, but there are
The reason I ask is timing-wise because I think Mr. Simpson's entitled to see how it's displayed to the jury.
It will be the first questions I'll ask you to ask the witness to stand down in front of the light box and to describe a few things about the auto rads that will be placed up. So it will be the beginning, yes.
All right, are you going to have her place them as part of your presentation?
Yes. Although I could have them placed to begin with, I don't have any problem with that.
All right, why don't we place them first, and we'll allow Mr. Simpson to take a look. Just to make sure we're not going to overload our circuits here.
Yes.
Okay,
At least it didn't yesterday.
all right.
It would also be possible when the jurors view it that we actually open up the other juror gate. We're going to move the chair so that they could walk in one direction. I think it might make for an easier
All right, makes sense.
walk by.
How easy is it to actually turn that around 180 degrees?
It does not go around completely 180. It goes to about an oblique 45.
No, I mean just turning it on its horizontal axis.
Good question. I think we'd have to try it, see what we could do.
All right, never mind. Put the film up. All right, this is the first set. All right, you want to light them up? All right. All right, Mr. Neufeld, Mr. Simpson, do you want to take a look? Let's just have, excuse me, counsel. Let's have Mr. Neufeld, Mr. Simpson, Mr. Cochran. Phone's off over there as well.
Now the second set.
I think we can do that at the next break. Let's keep these up and let's get rolling with the jury.
Now, because once we're done, and this isn't going to take long, I was going to have the locks go out of the courtroom, so we don't have to deal with it.
Set them up.
Would make is, apparently they're able to get all the x-ray films up there at one time, and since the jury has already seen these x-ray films displayed through the Elmo, they've also had Dr. Cotton hold them up, that's twice. They're now going to see them a third time on here. I don't know why we have to have two walkthroughs. It seems like at a certain point it's not only repetitive, it's cumulative. That's the only thing I would comment on.
Mr. Clarke?
They don't all fit. There's actually 3 sets. One of the sets has a single one. So they'd have to be smashed in where they all can't be seen.
The single one is simply item 56, which is blank, which they all have a copy of already.
All right, I think there's some benefit, though, to seeing them displayed side by side, so the objection will be overruled. All right, let's have the jurors, please. The jury door accessible there? Gentlemen, please be seated. All right, let the record reflect that we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All right, Dr. Cotton, would you please rise? Mr. Clarke, where do you anticipate questioning Dr. Cotton at this point?
I do, at the rather large light box that we have in the courtroom.
All right. All right, good morning, Dr. Cotton. You're reminded you were still under oath. Mr. Clarke, you may continue,
Thank you.
and hopefully conclude.
Yes.
Thank you.
Dr. Cotton, prior to the jury coming in, have you had an opportunity to put various of these x-ray films on this rather large light box that we have in the courtroom?
Yes.
And can you describe for us first which of the films are across the top row of the light box, and there appear to be 6 of them?
Excuse me, Mr. Clarke, why don't you let counsel pass so that they can be in a vantage point? All right, Dr. Cotton.
The 6 films across the top are the films that have items 52, 78, and 12, along with the 3 known samples and the rest of the controls. The film that had all the dots all over it with the background isn't up here since we weren't really able to make any interpretation from it. And the first film is the cocktail of 4 probes. The 4 films following the cocktail are each the individual films or the individual probes that are part of that cocktail, and the very last film is the probe that is not part of the cocktail.
Let me stop you for a moment. The top row, does it then have the films that you actually showed on the overhead projector yesterday with regard to the Bundy stain,
Yes.
the Rockingham foyer stain,
Yes.
and the boot stain?
Yes, with the exception of the one that has background on it.
Now, on the lower row, there appears to be one more film. What is it?
That's the film that was also passed out to the jury that has item 56 and the 3 known individuals.
All right, then with the court's permission, I'm going to light the light box and then ask the jurors further questions. I'm sorry, ask the witness further questions.
All right. Proceed.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Cotton, now that you have an opportunity to have all of these x-ray films on the light box at one time, would the fact that they're all together be helpful in explaining anything that yesterday you weren't able to explain as well because these films were not done all at one time or shown at one time?
There are 2 things that are useful in terms of putting them up on the light box. One is to just illustrate to you how they can be superimposed one on the other to identify the bands in the cocktail, and then also this is a much more optimal way to view them, not from quite that far away, but in terms of seeing bands that are not very dark.
All right, with respect to the upper row then, can you point out for us what you're talking about and which of these films show, for instance, this lightness and darkness and so forth, that it would be helpful to see while they're up all at one time?
The only pattern that we need to pay attention to in terms of where do we have light bands is the item 52 pattern. And the bands are most clearly visible on the cocktail, but individually one can go through and pick out bands in that. The other bands in the samples are pretty much easy to see, perhaps with 1 or 2 exceptions on item 78. So MS1 has a single band. It's up here where my finger is pointing for item 52. For MS31, the bands are quite easy to see. For MS43, again, they're very light, and 2 of them, for G3, they look fairly clear, but still light. And for YNH24, they are clear, but still light. So that is what you would be looking at if you were in the laboratory. You would be viewing it on a light box like this on your desk or on the counter or something.
And again, when you're referring to 52, you're referring to the stain from the Bundy walkway?
That's right.
Now, there's one more auto radiograph, X-ray that's down below, and I believe you said that's the particular film that was used in an attempt to type the shoe print number 56,
That's right,
and that yielded or produced no results, correct?
that's right.
Does that give you then the opportunity to show what a lane looks like that has no DNA in it versus lanes that have more DNA and then lanes with more DNA still, when you compare all 7 of these films?
Well, when you say it has no DNA in it, that's not literally correct. There was some DNA loaded, it just wasn't human, so there's no human DNA there. And it just is an example of a lane that has absolutely no bands in it at all.
All right, while these 7 films are present on the light box, is there anything further that you feel would be appropriate to point out in this comparison process?
Just in terms of understanding how these films relate to one another, let me pull one down and give an illustration, which won't be enormously easy to see, but hopefully you'll get the idea. Let's use, as an example, because it's fairly easy to see, let's look at item number 12. If we wanted to identify in item number 12 which of the bands here was produced by which probe, one can and here's the band I'm going to follow for MS1. Because these all came from the same membrane, they are superimposable. You can lay these one on top of the other, and I'm just now moved the top one slightly to the right, and I can see that the top band for item number 12 is the band that is produced by MS1, and they can be superimposed well enough so that now you can't really see that you have 2 films there.
Now, just for the record, Dr. Cotton, have you just taken the film that's labeled Exhibit 257B and placed it over the film labeled 257A?
Yes. And then you would go on and continue that process, and I won't go through all 6 films, but if you go on to the next film, MS31, you can do exactly the same thing, and I can determine from that the 2 bands that are in the middle here, the bottom 2 of this group of 3, are the bands in the cocktail that are produced by MS31. So once all the films have been completed, that's the procedure that you can use in the laboratory to go through and say, well, if I'm going to take my sizes from this film, which is the easiest thing to do, then I can identify which probes each of those bands comes from by simply superimposing them, making that identification, and then noting that in your case materials.
All right, Dr. Cotton, while we have these films on the board, I'd like you to assume, and let's start with number 56, the shoe print from the Bundy scene. I'd like you to assume that with regard to that particular blood stain, that was from a blood stain, and that was found on a walkway outside in an area that has leaves and apparent soil nearby.
Objection, Susan Clarke, not in evidence.
And that item was collected during a late morning time period on a given day. I'd then like to shift your attention to item number 52 from the Bundy walkway. And that would be referring you to the films that are Exhibit 257, A, B, C, and so forth. And I'd like you to assume that that was found on a concrete type driveway in an apparent cleaner area than item 56, but collected at approximately the same time that day, same day. And then lastly, I'd like you to assume with regard to item number 12, that in fact was blood staining from an indoor area, that is inside a home, on a floor, and that was collected later the same day in the late afternoon approximately. With those assumptions, do these results that you've obtained, are they consistent with degradation of DNA in relative amounts?
With the assumptions that you've just given me, the state of the DNA, the amount of degradation that we see in these three samples that you mentioned is consistent with the types of environment that you've just described.
Why? Can you explain that?
There have been a number of experiments published and also based on our own experience and talking with people from other DNA laboratories. We know that if a sample is exposed to soil or leaves, the likelihood of getting DNA from that sample that is good enough to use for RFLP is very low.
All right. How does the comparison of these three items, how does that play a role in your conclusions?
If item 56 was in an area where there were leaves or dirt or soil, the fact that we did not get any human DNA, but we did get DNA that was possibly bacterial DNA, is consistent with the assumption that you asked me to make.
All right. What about then the relative conditions of the DNA with regard then to the Bundy stain 52 and the Rockingham Foyer stain number 12?
The Bundy stain 52 has less DNA and DNA which is more degraded than the DNA in item number 12. And if item number 12 was collected from a cleaner location than item number 52, that would be consistent with the condition of the DNA as it's seen on the autorads and as it was seen on the small gel that was done after the DNA extraction.
Incidentally, when, for instance, a human cuts himself or herself and begins to bleed, does one's blood, as it's coming from one's body, have bacteria in it?
Not unless one is very ill.
So the bacteria comes from where then?
The bacteria in the blood would be then coming from whatever the blood was deposited on.
All right, at this time, Your Honor, it would be my request that the jurors have an opportunity to walk by and examine these particular films while they're on the light box.
All right, let's have the jurors in row number 1 then, starting with juror number 1. If you could file by the light box and then re-enter the jury box on the at the other jury door, please. And take your time. Mr. Clarke.
Yes, thank you. Now, Dr. Cotton, if I could ask you to remove the films that are on the light box right now, which are People's Exhibits 257, I believe, A through.
The complete series of 257.
Complete series except for 257C,
Right.
as well as Exhibit 246. And I'm going to ask you if you would now place on the board the films that constitute People's Exhibits 258A through F regarding the sock. Now, Dr. Cotton, with regard to People's Exhibit 258, those 6 films, first of all, with regard to the sock, are there any faint or weak bands that you need to point out?
No, there aren't.
All right. Your Honor, again, with the permission of the court, may the jury view this set of
Yes.
autoradiographs.
While they're looking at that, may we approach for 1 second?
Sure. All right, the record should reflect that each of the jurors has had and taken the opportunity to view both series of auto rads.
All right, Your Honor, may we remove the large light box?
Yes. Mr. Clarke.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Cotton, in the course of your testing, you described earlier the fact that you tested a number of samples that you received using the PCR process.
That's right.
How did you decide whether, well, let me rephrase that. How did you decide whether to type a sample using PCR or RFLP or both?
If the DNA was in sufficiently good condition for both, we did both. If it wasn't in sufficiently good condition to do RFLP, we then did PCR.
With regard to the samples that you identified on those boards that had a number of different photographs of envelopes and so forth, did you in fact test those samples either by RFLP or PCR or both?
Yes.
And did you obtain results from a number of those samples?
Yes, we did.
Your Honor, at this time I'd ask to be marked as people's next in order what I believe could be described as the Bundy results board.
All right. 259.
And I'm going to also ask the court's permission to be able to place in the location under the projector screen with a second tripod the earlier board, Exhibit 165, that is the photo board for the Bundy crime scene.
Refresh my recollection as to 165. Do we have victims depicted?
No, Your Honor.
All right. All right, where's Mr. Neufeld? I was just making sure you were positioning yourself so you could see the exhibit.
Your Honor, incidentally, the defense has copies of these boards. They were given
All right.
with the material shown on them.
Just on arrangements.
On the arrangements?
In other words, with the new configuration of the courtroom, I have a suggestion about the boards. Oh, I see, it's that one. Maybe it's impossible.
And we may have to move it back to give Dr. Cotton some ingress egress there. All right, let's proceed.
Excuse me, Your Honor, they can't see it. Of the jurors, they can't see it.
All right, Mr. Clarke, the difficulty is the height of the Bundy board. 165.
All right, then perhaps as I refer to individual items, we can raise it or point out as necessary.
All right.
All right, Dr. Cotton, with respect to various items of evidence, and if I may, I will direct you to specific item numbers and a brief description of them. Do you have before you the results that your laboratory obtained, whether it's PCR results or RFLP results?
Yes, I do.
All right. Initially, were you asked and did you test an item number 47 described as first drop by the victims at Bundy?
Yes, we did.
What type of testing did you use with respect to that item?
PCR testing.
At how many markers? And we'll try to do this as to this first marker and perhaps shorten it with the remaining markers.
6.
And would one of those markers be DQ alpha?
Yes,
And the other 5 markers be what?
they are the 5 markers that compile the polymarker.
And did you obtain results from that testing?
Yes, we did.
All right. With respect to those results, can you describe what the DQ alpha result was?
The DQ alpha result was a 1.1, 1.2.
Now, I'm going to ask you, and perhaps have you had a chance to look at these results boards before, Dr. Cotton?
Yes, I have.
And have you had an opportunity to look at not only the various items of evidence that are listed on the board, but also the known types of the three people in this case, Mr. Simpson, Nicole Brown, and Ronald Goldman, that are listed at the very top of the diagram?
Yes, I have.
With regard to the known types, that is the DQ alpha types, are the types shown on this board, People's Exhibit 259, with respect to those three known persons, accurate?
Yes, they were.
Now, with regard to, again, item number 47, this first drop by the victims at Bundy, did you also obtain polymarker results at those 5 additional markers?
Yes, we did.
As a result of those
I can't see it.
Okay. With regard to what's beneath that cover that I just removed, and this is item number 47, your laboratory, it states DQ alpha 1.1, comma 1.2, and then it says polymarker included.
That would be correct.
You previously, or just a few moments ago, testified that these results, including all 6 of these genetic markers, exclude Mr. Goldman and Nicole Brown. Is that right?
That's right.
And is Mr. Simpson then included as a possible donor of that blood stain?
Yes, he is.
When you use the term included again, does that mean he is or is not a possible source of that DNA?
When you say that he is included, it means that he is a possible source.
Now, turning your attention to the next item on the board, which is labeled number 48, Bundy Walk. Did you also test that sample using PCR?
I think I have to go to a different report, so you
All
need to
right.
give me a second.
Your Honor, while the witness is looking, I'm also going to remove the second magnetic portion of the board that's under the column not excluded relating to item number 47, the first drop.
Proceed.
Good thing these are getting lower too as we go.
Yes, we did have that sample.
And did you test that sample for the same 6 genetic markers using PCR?
Yes, we did.
With what result?
Did you want me to read the type or just...
Actually, were your results the same or different than 47, the first drop by the victims?
They were the same.
Does that mean then that the types were DQ alpha 1.1, 1.2, and as to the polymarker, an individual was included?
That's right.
Do those results include or exclude Mr. Goldman and Nicole Brown?
They exclude Mr. Goldman and Nicole Brown.
What about Mr. Simpson?
They do not exclude him.
All right, Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'm going to remove again both magnetic markers as to item 48, the Bundy walkway.
You may.
Turning your attention, Dr. Cotton, to number 49, another Bundy walkway stain. Did you type that particular evidence using these same 6 genetic markers using PCR?
Yes, we did.
With what results?
Mr. Simpson is included as a possible donor, and Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman are excluded as possible donors.
Now, does that include, or were your results as to number 49 on the Bundy walkway the same as for the first 2 items, 47 and 48, the other Bundy walkway stains?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, again, with the court's permission, I'm going to reveal the 2 appropriate
Yes.
covers.
Ms. Martinez, is it possible we could move the cart there just slightly? Thank you.
Now, referring you to what's marked number 50, bloodstains from the Bundy walkway, did you also test that sample?
Yes, we did.
Did you use the same or different genetic markers using PCR typing?
The same.
And with regard to the results, can you tell us what they were?
With regard to item number 50, Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman are excluded, and Mr. Simpson is included as a possible donor.
All right, Your Honor, with regard again to those results, I'm going to, with the court's permission, reveal the appropriate markers.
Proceed.
Turning your attention now to number 52, which is labeled the Bundy walkway. First of all, you've already described RFLP results with respect to that Bundy stain. Is that right?
That's right.
And I believe you described that there was a match between Mr. Simpson and this stain at a number of genetic markers. Is that right?
That's correct.
Or probes, as you've used the term?
That's right.
How many probes did Mr. Simpson match the 52 Bundy stain at?
5.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, there is a column with RFLP results, and I'm going to ask to be able to reveal that at this time also.
Proceed.
In other words, Dr. Cotton, was there a 5-probe match between Mr. Simpson and number 52, the Bundy stain, using your RFLP technique?
Yes, there was.
Did you also test that sample using PCR?
Yes, we did.
With what results?
If you'll have to wait just a second because I've thought I had turned to the correct page and I haven't. Oh, yes, I have. Okay.
Now, first of all, was that the same stain, and I'm referring to item number 52, that you discussed as far as RFLP results yesterday?
Yes, the same stain.
With what results as far as PCR is concerned?
The PCR results exclude Mr. Goldman and Nicole Brown, and they include Mr. Simpson.
All right, again, Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to reveal the remaining 2 magnetic covers.
Yes.
Now I'd like to turn your attention to the shoe print, item number 56, which you've testified about already both yesterday and today as far as RFLP typing,
Yes,
and you obtained no RFLP results as to that shoe print staining. Is that right?
that's correct.
What about PCR? Did you obtain any results as to that item?
Yes, we did.
What were they?
We obtained polymarker results, and we did get some signal on the DQ alpha results, but there was no C dot.
When you say no C dot, what does that, is that one of the controls you described?
That's one of the controls, and because we didn't see a C dot, we noted the types that we could see, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other types that we couldn't see.
Was there anything about, well, what types did you see as far as DQ alpha was concerned?
We
Objection, Your Honor, we approach.
Sustain. I'm going to sustain the objection.
Was there anything about the results using DQ alpha that excluded Mr. Simpson?
Using DQ alpha alone, given that we didn't see a C dot, we can't exclude him.
What about the polymarker results?
The polymarker results had the control turned out okay, and those results are, hang on one second. Those results are not consistent with Mr. Simpson.
With regard to the other two parties in this case, were those results consistent or inconsistent with them?
They are consistent with Nicole Brown and inconsistent with Ronald Goldman.
Let me stop you just for a moment, or go back if I can. When you said there was no C dot on this DQ alpha marker, what does that mean?
The C dot is designed to say that you have enough amplified product to reliably interpret your results. If you have no C dot, then what that means is that you may have so little amplified product that you could have a person, for example, that had 2 alleles, but you might only see one of them. So your typing the type that you see is one of the types that is there, but it may not be all of the types that are there.
Is that one of the built-in controls in the test that you described previously?
Yes, it is.
With regard to this result from the shoe print then, and I'm referring then to the polymarker results, was a particular individual included?
Yes,
Who was that?
Nicole Brown.
All right, Your Honor, with regard to the shoe print, I'd ask the court for permission to remove those covers.
Yes.
Objection, may we approach?
Nope, it's already been taken care of. Objection's overruled.
Turning your attention, Dr. Cotton, to item number 78, the Ronald Goldman boot drop. You have already described RFLP results over the last couple days, correct?
That's right.
How many probes were actually used in this test of that boot drop?
5.
And that's the RFLP probes?
Yes.
All right. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'm going to ask to remove the cover as far as RFLP testing is concerned.
Yes.
Did you also conduct PCR testing in that with regard to number 78, the boot drop?
Yes, we did.
And did you test that at these 6 genetic markers, including DQ alpha?
Yes, we did.
With what results?
The results indicate that there are a mixture of 2 people in the sample.
As far as those results, can you include or exclude any of the 3 persons, Mr. Simpson, Nicole Brown, or Ronald Goldman?
Mr. Simpson is excluded, and Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman cannot be excluded.
All right, Your Honor, with this item, I'd ask for permission to remove the 2 magnetic covers.
Yes. Excuse me, Mr. Fairtlow, before you bring up something that's got a victim's body in it, would you warn me, please? I have, but
Now, as far as the polymarker results, well, let me go one step backwards. The DQ alpha results on the boot drop, they show what appear to be 3 types plus the possibility of a 4th.
That's right.
Is that what leads you to the conclusion that that is a mixture?
That's right.
Did the polymarker results also show a mixture?
The polymarker results don't have any locus that has 3 types in it, so it's not clear from the polymarker results alone that there's a mixture. And the differences in the intensities of the blue dots are not really quite good enough to indicate definitely that there is or is not. So the determination that there's a mixture relies on the DQ alpha results.
Now, as far as those DQ alpha results, there are 3 types listed, 1.1, 1.3, and 4. Did you obtain those types?
Yes, we did.
And then you also note, do you not, possible 1.2.
That's right.
Why is it a possible 1.2?
When you have more than one individual in the DQ alpha test, the way the strips are designed is that you wouldn't be able to definitively read the 1.2 if you have a certain combination of alleles and you have more than one person. If you only have a single person, there's no problem. So when there's clearly a mixture, which there is here, and you can't definitively say whether the 1.2 is there or not, then it's generally reported as you have the alleles that you can define, and you have a possible 1.2, and you can't say that it is or is not definitively there.
Now, turning your attention to what are listed as items number 84A and 84B, the left and right-hand fingernail clippings and scrapings of Nicole Brown. Did you type those items using PCR?
Yes, we did, but you'll have to give me a second to locate the report.
All right, if you would.
Object to foundation on this, on those fingernail scrapings that come, I don't think they were sent directly from.
Oh, excuse me, Your Honor.
Mr. Clarke?
I believe that was a speaking objection.
It was?
Did we approach, Your Honor?
Yes,
Right,
let
for
the court
foundation.
report it, please.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, counsel. Mr. Clarke, would you continue?
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Cotton, with regard to 84A, and let's start there, Nicole Brown's left nail clippings, left nail.
Start again,
Try again, Your Honor.
please.
With regard to number 84A, the left nail clippings and scrapings, did you test that particular item?
Yes, we did.
And did you subject that, or was it tested using PCR?
Yes, it was.
With what results?
We're now on 84A.
Yes.
Okay. The results from the PCR testing on 84A are consistent with Nicole Brown Simpson and exclude Ronald Goldman and Mr. Simpson.
All right, and that was at, again, 6 genetic markers?
That's right.
All right, Your Honor, with the court's permission as to that item, the left nail clippings and scrapings, I'm going to ask for permission to remove the covers.
Yes.
Turning your attention now to what's marked 84B, the right nail clippings and scrapings from Nicole Brown. Did you also perform testing on that item?
Yes, we did.
With what results?
They are consistent with Nicole Brown, and they exclude Mr. Goldman and Mr. Simpson.
At the same 6 different markers?
That's right.
May I ask for the same permission, Your Honor?
Proceed.
Does that mean, Dr. Cotton, that you obtained the exact same results for 84A as you did for 84B, the clippings?
It does.
And then lastly, with regard to this item, 84B, referring your attention to the right scrapings, did you also test those using PCR?
Yes, we did.
With what results?
They are consistent with Nicole Brown, and Mr. Simpson and Mr. Goldman are excluded.
And were these the exact same results as in the earlier 2 nail clipping and scrapings results?
They are.
Your Honor, may I have the same
Proceed.
permission? All right, Your Honor, I'm going to ask that this board now be taken down.
All right. And how about 165 as well?
Yes.
Mr. Clarke.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Cotton, I believe it was day before yesterday that you described with regard to your controls. May I have just a moment, Your Honor? You described a couple of days ago that with regard to all the controls and all of the tests that you did, that they all worked properly with the exception of, and I think you said there were weak reactions as to one sample. Is that right?
That's right.
Could you describe that more for the jury, please?
Yes, if you'd just give me a minute.
Sure. I'm going to ask that one of the previous drawings, Exhibit 254, be placed up so that the witness can refer to it for a few questions.
All right. I think we'll need to move that to exchange places with the large easel. All right, Dr. Cotton, do you have those results?
No, I need a couple minutes.
Mr. Clarke, would you have that sheet in your notes? All right, why don't you show that to Dr. Cox?
All right.
Oh, yeah, why couldn't I find that? Can I just say, E1294? There we go.
Do you have that now, Dr. Cox?
I do.
All right, if you would you describe what you meant by those faint reactions that you described a couple days ago?
With regard to sample, the sample which was item 7, we had done this PCR reaction and gotten a faint product, so we attempted to concentrate the sample and try it again. After that concentration step, we picked up 2 faint dots in the polymarker reagent blank.
Now, we have placed or had placed out here a drawing that you did entitled PCR Controls, which is labeled Exhibit 254. I'm going to ask you if you would step down from the witness stand and use that drawing to describe what you've just testified to.
This is the listing of the various controls that one normally does when you do a PCR reaction. For the sample that I'm referring to, the positive control was fine. And then we talked about 2 kinds of negative controls. One is started at the very beginning of the test and carried through just as if it was a sample, and that's the reagent blank. The second is added at the time the reaction is set up, and that's the negative control. In this case, with regard to this sample, it is the reagent blank control that showed 2 faint dots. And this control was carried through and amplified at the same time. A number of samples were amplified, and on its first amplification, it was fine. It didn't show any faint dots. Only after the manipulations that it went through along with item number 7 that needed to be concentrated, so the reagent blank was concentrated as well. At that point, when it was re-amplified and reanalyzed, then it showed a faint B at the D7S8 location and a faint C at the GC location. It didn't show any other dots. It didn't give a complete type. It didn't have a C dot or an S dot, but those faint dots were noted when the analyst and a second analyst read the results, and they're recorded in the casework notes.
What's the significance of seeing those 2 dots?
Well, there's 2 ways you could interpret that. One possibility is that there was a very, very low amount of contamination in the reagent blank to begin with, so low that it couldn't be amplified. That is, there was a tiny amount of human DNA there, but not enough to be amplified, not enough to see anything. And then, in the process of concentrating that sample, you concentrated it just enough. That is, you reduced the volume, but you didn't reduce the amount of DNA, that now you're seeing these 2 faint dots, and they're barely detectable. The other scenario that would account for that is that the reagent blank was clean up until the point that the sample was concentrated, and the manipulation of putting it through the it's a little tiny thing, but putting it through this concentration step, somehow in doing that, we picked up a very small amount of contaminating DNA, and that's what we saw. And there's no way to know which of those 2 alternatives accounts for obtaining those two faint dots in the reagent blank, but those are the two possibilities.
How many samples were involved in this testing that had that faint reaction in the reagent blank?
Just one.
And I believe you said that was number 7?
That's number 7. Now, let me clarify that. That reagent blank was started with a series of samples, and I don't remember exactly, without going back to the notes, which samples it was started with, but it was several. Most of the samples typed just fine, as did the reagent blank produce no type on the first amplification. So the reagent blank for those samples is okay. It only affects we only looked at it and tried to take it into account with respect to item number 7, because that was the item that was then concentrated and then typed. And actually then it was typed, the pre-concentration was typed also, and all those results were consistent.
Item number 7 was a Rockingham driveway stain.
I believe so.
Now, as far as these controls, and first of all, did you ultimately report a result for number 7, the Rockingham driveway stain?
We did report a result.
Why is that okay to do under these circumstances?
The sample was amplified twice, before it was concentrated and after it was concentrated. In both instances, it gave exactly the same results. And the reagent blank dots that I described, whatever they were in the faint B and the faint C, were so light that we felt this could not possibly have compromised the types that we saw in that sample, and therefore we went ahead and reported it.
Now, on 254, you have listed at the bottom reagent blank control. Is that what we're talking about?
That's what we're talking about.
Okay, is that different from what you have above, the negative control?
Yes, it is.
How are those two different?
They are started at different times.
And as far as this particular evidence was involved, did you get any reactions or sign of contamination from the negative control?
No, we didn't.
With regard to your testing, is there any other evidence of contamination whatsoever in any of your tests in this case?
No.
All right, if you could you have a seat back on the witness stand, Dr. Cotton? Thank you. Dr. Cotton, you also described the fact when you were going through one of the boards, and I believe it was yesterday, as far as some of the evidence items that you received some unstained or substrate controls as well?
That's right.
As far as this...
Excuse me, Doctor, would you pull the microphone close to you, please?
Oh,
Thank you.
As far as the Bundy crime scene, did you receive unstained controls for one of the Bundy walkway stains, number 49, as well as the shoe print 56?
yes, we did.
Did you test those for any DNA in them?
Yes, we did.
With what results?
No results. We didn't get any types, any dots.
As a DNA,
Nothing.
I'm sorry,
We got nothing.
as a DNA analyst, is that important in any way because it was a substrate control?
Well, it tells you that the immediate, I don't know, I don't have personal knowledge of where that substrate control was taken, but generally it would be taken close to the stain. So it tells you that the surrounding or the area from which the substrate control, which was, if I can assume it was close to the stain, didn't have DNA in it, so that the DNA that you get from the sample is DNA from the stain.
Now, I'd like to shift your attention back to the fingernail scrapings and clippings that were number 84. That is from Nicole Brown.
Yes.
The items that you actually received for DNA typing came from whom?
They came from the Department of Justice.
Is that the California Department of
Yes.
Justice?
Excuse me, Dr. Cotton, would you allow Mr. Clarke to finish asking the question before you start to answer?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
What form did they come to you in? And I'm talking about just the fingernail scrapings and clippings.
They were already extracted DNA.
Meaning they came to you in what form? Can you just
They
describe that?
came in it was a very small volume of liquid in a very small tube.
Now I'd ask, Your Honor, that be marked as the People's next exhibit, which I believe is 260, what can be described as the Bronco results board.
260. And Mr. Clarke, we're going to break at 10:30.
Very good.
Ms. Olson, are you going to be with me all morning? Okay, thank you.
Dr. Cotton, incidentally, with regard to what has been described as the Bronco automobile, did you test one item of evidence from that particular location?
Yes, we did.
And can you describe what that piece of evidence was?
Can you give me an item number?
Sure. If I can direct your attention to what's been described as item number 29, the Los Angeles Police Department item number, and described as the steering wheel.
Okay, you have to give me a minute now to find that report.
All right.
Which item is this on the board?
Item number 29.
All right, we're fine.
Having a little trouble going back and forth between our numbers and the item numbers.
Take your time, we don't want to confuse these.
Okay.
Mr. Clarke, do you have a date on this or anything that can assist Dr. Cotton? You found it?
I have it, yes.
All right, Mr. Clarke.
All right, Dr. Cotton, did you in fact test that item number 29?
Yes, we did.
And what did you test it by? What method?
Using the DQ alpha and the polymarker test.
Were these the 6 genetic markers again?
Yes.
What results did you obtain?
We obtained results that indicated there was a mixture in that item.
And with regard to that mixture, let's start with the DQ alpha results. What were they?
A 1.1, a 1.2, and a 4.
Did you also test that particular item using these 5 polymarkers?
Yes, we did.
First of all, did the results of that test indicate the possibility of a mixture?
The results of the polymarker also indicate that there's a mixture.
All right, Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'm going to remove the first magnetic cover as to item 29.
Proceed.
Dr. Cotton, with regard to that series of results, or what's written that I've just revealed with the magnet, does that accurately describe the results you obtained?
Yes, it does.
As far as the 3 individuals, that is Mr. Simpson, Nicole Brown, and Ronald Goldman are concerned, can you make any conclusion about who was included or excluded from that result?
Mr. Simpson is included. Mr. Goldman is not included. And Nicole Brown could be included.
All right, so as far as individuals who are not excluded, that would be whom?
Ronald Goldman.
I'm sorry, not excluded?
Oh, sorry, that would be Mr. Simpson and Nicole Brown.
All right, Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'm going to reveal that marker. And in fact, Dr. Cotton, should there be an additional name up there from these three parties? Since there's one name at the moment.
Yes,
And who would that be?
Nicole Brown.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'm going to simply write in that name if that's acceptable. Or ask the witness to.
No, why don't you proceed?
Proceed with writing.
Yes.
For the record, I've written in the name Brown beneath Simpson on this particular exhibit.
All right. Proceed.
Is this the only item you tested as far as you know from the Bronco automobile?
Yes.
Could I have just a moment, Your Honor? Now, as far as this particular item, did you also receive an unstained control for item number 29?
Yes, we did.
Did you test that using this PCR typing process?
Yes, we did.
With what result?
There were no results for that unstained control.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to move to another board, which I believe would be People's Exhibit 261.
All right. Before we do that, why don't we take our break?
That's fine.
All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a recess for the morning session. This might be slightly longer than our normal recesses. Please remember all of my admonitions to you. Don't discuss the case amongst yourselves. Don't form any opinions about the case. Don't discuss the matter with anybody else. Don't conduct any deliberations till the matter has been submitted to you. And we'll stand in recess. All right? Thank you. Mr. Cochran's put his newspaper away. All right, just so the record's clear, counsel, Mr. Neufeld has asked for some additional time to review the report from Dr. Weir. Is that correct, Bruce Weir?
That's correct.
All right, and our agreement is that if the prosecution concludes that they'll be allowed to reopen, and it'll be made clear to the jury that they're being allowed to reopen it. And the reason is that the defense needed some additional time to consider the report.
In fact, not only were they allowed to be reopened, but given the court's earlier ruling, they are compelled to reopen, actually, so they can express those frequencies.
Well, it depends on which spin you want to put on it.
I never felt compelled to reopen before.
All right?
Two items that I wanted to bring up to the court. One we've already mentioned. I'll deal with that second. The first is that it's our intent to bring out from this witness, Dr. Cotton, population frequency data that includes not only those markers tested in her laboratory, now this is PCR only that I'm referring to, DQ alpha and polymarker, but also to incorporate D1S80 results obtained by the Department of Justice. And the reason for that is to avoid having to bring witnesses back and forth in this somewhat combined nature of testing in this case. And I want to bring that up to the court before I laid a foundation for her knowledge of that marker and so forth.
DS-180.
D1S80.
D1S-80.
And the idea is to avoid calling Dr. Cotton again as a witness following the Department of Justice's results. I think it's perfectly appropriate to do so. We know the evidence is going to show these results. So I don't think there's any problem of foundation. It's more order.
Mr. Neufeld, any comment?
Well, Your Honor, there's not even been any results yet about D1S80 testing. There's been no foundation for the D1S80 test results yet, not even the normal foundation. There's no reason why they can't have Gary Sims, once he puts in his data, then looks at the cell mark numbers and compounds it or multiplies it with his own data. One moment. And if it's not going to be Gary Sims, it's going to be Renee Montgomery, who also they put on their witness list as someone who will be testifying from DOJ. I mean, there's really no reason to do it in this instance. And it seems like if you simply, balance the interest here, to have them put in numbers on evidence that the jury hasn't even heard about yet is highly improper, and Robin Cotton doesn't have to come back. They can have those numbers combined by the witnesses who put in the other data.
Mildly unusual.
I would Well, I don't think it's that unusual. It's because of the order of proof of these witnesses, but I think Mr.
But we're talking about here tests that haven't even been presented to the jury, tests that the jury only vaguely expects since they see DOJ and they've seen the boards and they know that there'll be some testing from DOJ. But to include testing results that have not even been presented even in a basic form yet to the jury without even understanding what the test is, that's and given the significance and breadth of the testing, I'm having a problem with that, Mr. Clarke.
Well, if Mr. Neufeld's going to stipulate to Mr. Sims' ability to make these calculations, then that may be a different matter, and we may agree to that. He's just said, which is totally contrary to what, for instance, his attack was, at least by way of objection, to Dr. Cotton's qualifications. Now, I think it's our right to be able to present this from the witness or witnesses we choose. Mr. Sims will provide, for instance, calculations that that involve testing that doesn't involve the same item also tested by Cellmark. So I think it's our right to be able to present that through that witness, and I think under these circumstances, it's clear this evidence is coming in. The objection to the admissibility, for instance, of D1S80 results was waived, so we know this evidence is coming in. And I think just simply as a matter of the court's discretion, it can allow this witness to describe that. In other words, in terms of frequency data, because we know it's going to be admissible as a result of the defendant's waiver of his initial motion attacking this evidence.
Even with the initial motion, Your Honor, there's still the normal foundation requirements, and there's been absolutely no witness testifying to any of the testing methods, that they were the same generally accepted methods used in this particular case, that they were actually done, and what the results were. Robin Cotton would be testifying completely on the basis of hearsay as to the typing, as to the results, and as to the frequencies. That's three different major issues which the court's going to have to make a preliminary decision on, forgetting Fry, forgetting all those other issues. I just think it's just not fair at all. They'll be able to call their witness, whoever their witness is they want, who lays a proper foundation, has the credentials, and can testify to frequencies, and can then take the frequencies articulated by Robin Cotton and multiply them or add them or do whatever she intends to do with them to compound them, but not to do it this way.
I think this could be offered as a hypothetical. Talk about a good faith basis for some of the questions that have been asked. I mean, this couldn't be any clearer.
I'm going to sustain the objection. I think that this is so broad, and the foundational basis that needs to be laid for yet another PCR test and for the appropriate procedures and all of that to allow in results before any of that is done. I think the court, in its discretion with regards to the order of proof, will sustain the objection.
All right, could I have just a moment, Your Honor?
Certainly. Certainly.
Just with regard to this process, it will put us in the position of having to bring Dr. Cotton back another time. And I think based on all of this evidence and the fact that we have it available, it's certainly in good faith that we legally have the right to do so. And I think under these circumstances, the court should.
All right. Noted. Denied.
Very good. In that event, we're ready to proceed.
Thank you. Let's have the jury. seated. All right, Dr. Cotton, would you resume the witness stand, please? All right, the record should reflect that we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Mr. Clarke, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Cotton, if we can, I'd like just to go back to the results from the Bronco, that is the steering wheel stain, item number 29. You have described the fact that Mr. Simpson is not excluded or could have been a person who provided that blood stain. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And let's just start with DQ alpha. How do you know that? What about those results let you know that?
Item 29 has the following alleles for DQ alpha. It has a 1.1, a 1.2, and a 4.
If I could, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you if you would to point to the board as far as those markers that you just described for DQ alpha so that we can all see that.
Steal my pointers?
Okay, Mr. Simpson is shown at the very top of the board, and he has a 1.1 and a 1.2. The steering wheel item 29 sample has a 1.1 and a 1.2 and a 4. So two of the alleles or types that are found on the steering wheel are the same as Mr. Simpson's type. So he would be included based on the DQ alpha results as being a possible donor to the DNA taken from item 29.
Without getting into the individual types of the 5 polymarkers, was the same also true based on your typing results from that particular set of markers?
Yes, it was.
Now, what about Nicole Brown? You described the fact that she also could be a donor of that stain.
That's correct.
What do you base that conclusion on?
Nicole Brown has a 1.1 type. She has two 1.1 alleles. There is a 1.1 in the steering wheel, and therefore, based on the DQ alpha results, she would also be included as a possible donor to that mixture of people.
What statement, if any, can you make about that DQ alpha 4 that's also a result obtained from this steering wheel?
The DQ alpha 4 is shared with the allele 4 for Mr. Goldman, but his allele 1.3 isn't visible in the DQ alpha type from the steering wheel. So that 4 comes from someone, but we can't make any determination as to who.
As far as the results, and let's take the results you obtained in this case, and let's take the steering wheel stain as an example. This is a mixture, correct, what you tested?
Yes.
As far as when portions of a mixture may have been left on that steering wheel, can you scientifically state that they occurred at the same time?
No, absolutely not.
All right. If I could then, Your Honor, I'm going to ask asked to be marked as People's Exhibit 261, a further results board,
All right.
which can be described, I believe, as the Rockingham residence. And I believe that's right behind the current board.
All right, 261. And we'll need to raise that up.
Now, Dr. Cotton, referring you to this third results board labeled Rockingham Residence, and in particular to an item marked number 7, Rockingham Driveway,
Yes.
I believe you even discussed this item a little bit earlier this morning. Is that right?
Yes.
Did you, in fact, use that particular evidence stain from the Rockingham Driveway and type it using the PCR technique?
Yes, we did.
With what results?
The results that we got DQ alpha types, we got polymarker results. There was no C dot, again, on this DQ alpha type, So although we saw some dots and we recorded those, there was no C dot for the DQ alpha. The polymarker results had the appropriate control dot, and they were reported.
As far as these DQ alpha results on the Rockingham driveway stain number 7, did you say that you don't, well, let me rephrase that. You didn't see a C dot, is that right?
That's right.
And as part of your protocol, what effect does that have on your results?
Well, it's the same thing that I said earlier this morning. That means the types that you have are types that are in that sample, but you cannot be guaranteed that there are not types that you're not seeing. That is, there may be types in the sample that you are not seeing in your DQ alpha results.
Was there anything about the types that you did see that excluded, for instance, Mr. Simpson?
No, there were not.
All right. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'm going to reveal the first magnetic cover.
Proceed.
And as far as these results, Dr. Cotton, can you make any statement about the three parties in this case, whether any of them can be included or excluded from these results?
Based on the polymarker results, the Mr. Simpson can be included, and Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman are excluded.
And again, Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'll remove that cover.
Proceed.
Just for the record, it should be noted,
Same
same
objection.
objection I made before, be a standing objection for similar situations.
Noted.
Thank
Thank you. Proceed.
Let's turn to what's marked number 12, the Rockingham foyer stain. Do you recall that?
I do?
And you testified yesterday, as well as this morning, about the fact that that stain was tested using the RFLP method,
That's right.
and there was a match obtained to Mr. Simpson. Is that right?
That's correct.
At how many probes?
5.
All right, Your Honor, I'm going to ask you to remove that label.
Proceed.
And then let's turn to the PCR results on that particular stain. Did you obtain some?
Yes, we did.
What were they?
The results that we obtained on item 12 indicate that Mr. Simpson is a possible donor, and Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman are excluded as possible donors.
All right, Your Honor, with the court's permission, again, may I remove those labels?
You may.
Other than the fact that with regard to the Rockingham's driveway stain number 7 and the fact that no CDOT was observed, are the types you actually detected the same in both number 7 and number 12, the Rockingham foyer stain, as far as the PCR results themselves?
Yes, the types that we saw are the same.
And they both include Mr. Simpson but exclude both Ronald Goldman or Nicole Brown?
Yes.
As far as number 7 is concerned, the driveway stain, did you even attempt RFLP typing?
I don't know, we didn't.
Why not?
The stain was too degraded, the DNA was too degraded.
All right. As far as the particular items in this case, were you provided an unstained control from either of these stains?
For 12 and 7?
And did you test those? I'm sorry. Are you able to determine if you obtained controls for each of those items or one item or what?
Probably so, but are they in the set of controls that we obtained at the very end?
I believe so, if that will help you locate the
It
document.
would. Yes.
And was that both 7 and 12 or just one or the other?
It was both 7 and 12.
And were these unstained substrate type controls that you were asked to test?
Yes, they were.
Did you obtain any DNA results from either one of those controls?
We did not obtain any results from either of those controls.
Now, taking you back to item number 7, the Rockingham driveway stain, I believe you said the DNA was too degraded to use RFLP typing?
Yes.
What does that mean?
It means that the DNA had been broken up in a random manner by whatever effects it was exposed to. And so the pieces were basically too small to give an RFLP result.
And therefore you turn to PCR
PCR.
typing. All right. With respect to these substrate controls, again, what does that negative result mean to you as an analyst?
It means that from wherever the substrate control was taken, presumably in an area close to the stain, that there was no DNA in that area.
All right, Your Honor, at this time I'd like to turn to one final results board. I believe that would be People's Exhibit 262. I believe it can be described as the results board for the socks.
All right, 262, results board, socks.
Dr. Cotton, referring you to this new board that's been marked or will be marked People's Exhibit 262 that refers to the Rockingham socks, you have already described RFLP testing that was conducted on stain material provided to you. Is that correct?
Yes,
And you described that material or that blood staining as matching Nicole Brown. Is that right?
that's correct.
At how many probes?
At 5 probes.
Did you also, and Your Honor, may I remove the RFLP results?
You may.
Dr. Cotton, you described the fact that that 5-probe match was with Nicole Brown. Is that right?
That's right.
May I also remove that cover, Your Honor?
You may.
Now, turning your attention, Dr. Cotton, if I can, to PCR testing, was that also done on this DNA, this bloodstain material from that sock?
Yes, it was.
With what results?
The results from the PCR testing, which is DQ alpha and polymarker, include Nicole Brown as being a donor and exclude Mr. Goldman and Mr. Simpson.
All right, Your Honor, at this time, may I remove the final cover?
You may.
Does that mean then, Dr. Cotton, that not only RFLP typing matched Nicole Brown, but so did 6 additional genetic markers using PCR?
It certainly does.
Now, Dr. Cotton, I'd like to turn your attention to and return for a few moments to population frequency data. You use frequency data again in your description of the meaning of results. Is that right?
That's correct.
And the reason for that again is what?
For any set of genetic markers, a particular combination might be more common or less common depending on the alleles, because some alleles are common and found in lots of people, and some alleles are not very common and not found in very many people. So it's a way to say this is a common type or a rare type that we've identified in a particular sample.
Now, you described a couple days ago about determining this estimate, this means of providing some description about how rare or common types are that may be shared, as being able to be used when more than one genetic marker is concerned. Is that right?
That's right.
How do you do that?
Essentially, you're saying, how often do I see the set of characteristics in the first genetic marker I look at? And then how often do I see the set of characteristics in the second genetic marker I've looked at? So the overall combination is that how often would I see the combination genetic characteristics from the first marker and the second marker would be the product of those two numbers. That is, you would multiply them together, and that would give you the overall estimation of how often you would see the group of characteristics from two markers. If you added an additional marker, then you would multiply that in as well, and so on.
Why is it appropriate or okay to do that, to provide this estimate?
As long as the markers are inherited independently and are statistically independent of each other in their inheritance, that is, they need to be on separate chromosomes, but also people would ask, are they statistically independent? As long as they're independent of one another, then the appropriate mathematical calculation is to multiply those individual frequencies of occurrence together to get the overall frequency of occurrence.
Now, with regard to this, and I believe you said different chromosomes, is that right?
That's right.
Do you in fact use, and let's look at RFLP typing first, do you use probes that are on different chromosomes or the same chromosomes?
Of the 5 probes that we used, they are all on different chromosomes with one exception. That is, 2 are on the same, although they are located at a considerable distance apart, which means that they also would be inherited independently. And the remainder are on 4 additional and different chromosomes.
That was going to be my next question. How can you use, for instance, these 2 probes or 2 genetic markers that you said were on the same chromosome?
It's the long explanation, which I won't try to give you, has to do with how DNA is distributed when eggs and sperm are created. That is, because they each have half. When 2 markers are relatively far apart on a chromosome, the chances of them being passed on to an offspring are equal. That is, it would be they wouldn't tend to be passed along together. And if I'm not doing this part very well. If 2 markers are close together on a chromosome, when that DNA goes into an egg or a sperm, they tend to go together. There is exchange of DNA between the chromosomes while eggs and sperm are being created, so that if 2 markers are far apart, they are not any more likely to go into the same egg or sperm as 2 markers that are on different chromosomes. That's the best I can do without giving a long biology lesson.
All right, with regard to these 2 markers that are on the same chromosome, have you done or have you established or shown to your satisfaction or other satisfaction that in fact they're not inherited together?
The work was not done at Cellmark. The work was originally done by Alec Jeffries, and he established that they are in fact sufficiently far apart to be considered to be inherited independently.
Now, you've described this multiplication process, that is, the frequency at one marker, the frequency at the next marker, and so forth. Is that any different than what has been used in these conventional serology cases about which we spoke for a number of years?
No, it would be the same calculation as used in conventional serology.
Now, as far as calculating frequencies, did you calculate frequencies in this case based on your laboratory's results?
Yes, we did.
And was that for the various samples that you have described over the last 2 days?
Yes.
First of all, do you keep databases in your laboratory?
Yes, we do.
What are those?
It's basically a sample of a population of people from which you will derive your estimation of how often you would see a particular genetic characteristic.
And what purpose do you use these databases for?
To ultimately assign a frequency to the genetic characteristics in a particular test, and then assign an overall frequency for some combination of characteristics.
As far as these RFLP results in this case, and I believe you've described samples that match, for instance, Mr. Simpson, is that right?
Yes.
As well as samples that match Nicole Brown.
Yes.
Do you compare those set of characteristics, or have you compared those set of characteristics to the number of individuals in your databases?
Yes, we have.
Did they match, did either one of them match anyone in your databases?
No, they do not.
Now, as far as your calculation, actually, let me ask another question. As far as your calculation of frequencies in this case, are those simply estimations of how rare these matching characteristics are?
Yes.
What role, and I think you touched on this day before yesterday, what role do major racial groups have in this frequency calculation process?
For some genetic characteristics, they can be more common. Let me give a concrete example. Maybe it'll be a little bit easier. Let's just take DQ alpha, for example. And I'm making up these figures since I don't remember the real ones. Let's say the type 1.1, 1.1. It could be very common in Caucasians and very rare in Hispanics, or it could be very common in Caucasians and very rare in blacks, or the reverse. And so in order to give a appropriate range of how common or rare a set of characteristics is, it is usual to say this is the figure for how often you would see this in Caucasians, this is the figure for how often you would see this in African Americans, and this is the figure for how often you would see this in Hispanics. And if you had other racial databases at your disposal, you could go on and do that for other groups as well.
Why don't you simply calculate an estimate of the frequency based on one group as opposed to another?
Well, you could. It would sort of give you an overall kind of averaged figure, but it wouldn't give you the range of figures that using individual racial groups would, and therefore using individual racial groups is generally considered to be a more informative way of giving that number.
In the way you calculate these estimates, do you take any steps along the way? Well, do you have to make decisions about kind of which way to do something when you calculate these frequencies? Does that make any sense?
No.
Okay, let me try that again then. Do you take any steps along the way to ensure that you're not making something sound, as far as a match, rarer than it really is?
The particular steps that are taken, let me just first refer to RFLP, because this is really where that question becomes applicable. If you remember a couple days ago, I guess, I talked about, we sort of drew out a small database of 5 people and talked about looking at a window of sizes around a particular DNA fragment size. And it's that window that you are using to reflect the accuracy of your gel system and to not overestimate how rare a particular characteristic is.
As far as this calculation process itself, do you go through it whether it's an RFLP type test or a PCR type test that's used?
Yes.
Are there different, I think you said that there were a little bit different considerations in each of the two, is that right?
In the PCR test, when you have, say, a 1.1 allele, you don't have any particular window you need to put around that. That's clearly defined as a 1.1. It's not close to a 1.1. It doesn't have the same features of creating a DNA fragment size where you know that that fragment size is also an estimation. So you have a 1.1 and you don't need to build a window around that, so you can go directly to your database and use the frequencies in the database that you have available to you.
Now, as far as these various samples, do you calculate then this estimate, or did you calculate this estimate based on different major racial groups?
Yes, we did.
Can you describe what those racial groups are?
We did the RFLP and the PCR estimates for African Americans, Caucasians, and Hispanics.
Why do you use those groups?
Those are the groups that we have data on at Cellmark. And in addition, the PCR data, some of that population data was compiled from other laboratories as well. The only other major racial group that one might use in the United States might be Oriental, which would include Japanese and Chinese and Korean and so on. We do not at Cellmark have a population database that's currently in use for that racial group, so we aren't providing any statistical estimates for that group.
As far as these racial groups, and you've described that you have reported, for instance, in this case, results from 3 major groups,
That's right.
what about the existence of other population groups around the world? There's more than 3, obviously, and you've named a 4th.
Is that a question?
I think that's a question, but I better make sure it's a question. You've just named a 4th group, for instance, that you don't report results for.
That's right.
And I believe you described the fact that that's because you don't have database material. Is that right?
That's right.
How do you know when you report frequencies from these 3 groups that you did perform that estimation process in this case, that somehow you're not overstating the rarity dramatically or significantly when other population groups may have, in fact, a more common set of these characteristics?
Besides the population data that's available in our laboratory, there is an enormous amount of population data that's been produced by forensic laboratories all over the United States and all over Europe and a few laboratories elsewhere, including Australia and Japan. The system that we use that I discussed for this testing is not, I can't take our population data at Cellmark and compare it to population data that's been produced by the Federal Bureau of Investigation or the California Department of Justice, because we used a different restriction enzyme, and if you'll just accept for the moment that that makes the DNA sizes a little bit different. However, the European community uses the same enzyme that we do. So there has been a lot of work, mostly spearheaded through the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to get all of the population data that's been obtained all together in one major volume. And when you look at all of this data together, what you see is that there are some differences in the populations, but they're not huge for RFLP loci, for those loci. This is not applicable. What I'm saying is not correct about the PCR loci. So I'm just talking about RFLP. So that you could go on and do more racial groups, but they would continue to produce numbers in the same range that you're getting with 3 or 4. So it would be a more refined estimate, but it wouldn't really provide you with a huge amount of information that you aren't already getting with 3.
Now, I believe you said it does not apply to the PCR groups. What do you mean?
The PCR locations that we've tested here do differ significantly from one racial group to the next. So if you did more than 3 groups, you might still see some differences. That is, you might get something that's more common than the 3 examples that we've provided, or less